When your client demands a very narrow specification range or a high CPK, you can either start really testing your end product, throwing away everything that doesn't meet their specs, or improve your process. But to do that, you need to check a lot more than just the outcoming product. Hello, I'm Tom. Welcome to my channel where we talk about continuous improvement in an industrial setting. And the topic of today's video is how to steer for stable output, mainly by using good, stable inputs. And let's first check what we usually see is when we have a process that makes a product, sometimes more products, but from this product we know there is some spread. There is a natural variation in the output of almost anything that we make. And when we have specification limits, so these are the products with a lot of products being around this part, a couple of products being a bit smaller, a couple of products being a bit bigger. The red lines are our pretty tight customer specifications. Now what we see with some experience in SPC or in CPK is that this product process is not capable. So our products will quite often fall over one of our specification limits, and even on the lower end, not really a nice customer versus capability of our process to be working with. We will have a lot of defects here. But what I also often then see is that when we have processes where we see a relatively high spread, so there is a low process capability and we have a lot of defects because they are not up to specs, we start checking more and more on the output, and we give operators a target: make sure that you get a more stable production process and make sure that the products that come out are more stable. Now, from a client and also even from an organizational standpoint, this is logical. This is the result that you want. But this way, we are not guiding the operator and the process how to achieve it. And as continuous improvement specialists, in achieving that desired output is what puts our bread on the table. So when we take a look at the entire process, what we often see is a lot of different inputs. For instance, the material itself already can be a bit more, a bit less, a bit hotter, a bit harder. Temperatures that are put into the process, pressures, the time that we use to form or press our products, they can all change a little bit. And in our standard operating procedures, what will often be said is we have a level, but it's also allowed to have a certain plus and minus versus the norm input, the norm setting. For instance, the temperature should be around 60. Anywhere between 55 and 65 is good. But what does this tell our operator to do with their process? It should be clear what the setting is. Now, for a result, it is okay to say there is a specific bandwidth. But for a setting, you should say this is the setting, and that's how we set it. Now, of course, when we know our process, and we also know that there might be some variation in the rest of the process, or maybe the material, it just works a little bit differently from day to day, and we give another clear rule saying when the size of the final product goes up 5 units, we correct it by lowering the temperature from 60 to 58, for instance. But then again, you have a very clear type of calculation. There should only be one set point for anything you set in the process. So don't give any range on a setting. Now, if it is a material, this is not a setting. So basically we get something that we usually get from a product, also put it on your incoming materials. This is okay. So a set point or a material. Materials really can have a range where you say this is where it should be. But for a set point, only one. Now I think that this is actually pretty understandable, maybe even self-explanatory, but when we talk about this, most people in organizations, production organizations say, yes, of course, we should focus on the inputs because that's where we still can do something. As soon as we have a product out of our line, we can't change the situation anymore. So yes, we can still say that part of the production we filter off so that it doesn't get to the client, but the damage is done. So this is logical. But then what we see usually happening is it is easier and it's also demanded. So our clients already demand in many cases that we test our product. And if it's not the client, then it is some semi or fully governmental organization. The certification organizations demand from companies that they test their final product. So this data is available. Let's go for that. And it is the end result that we are interested in. And to also check our settings and our inputs would just generate extra registration. And apparently, in many organizations, this is enough reason to stay here. But I'm telling you, if you want to have stable processes and stable production, make sure that this is where you put your control. You check if you can keep your standards standardized, if your inputs are stable. And that also means that when we check KPIs, so the performance indicators, that's nice for a higher level of organization, let's say a weekly or a monthly board, or maybe a couple steps down the process. But when we are talking about a line board or checking how the processes on the shop floor are performing in an hourly, daily basis, this is really where our focus should be. So make sure that you check if machines are set to all the parameters that we defined in our standard operating procedures. And by the way, if you do not have a standard setting in your operating procedures, there is work to be done. Work for technologists, for process improvers, for management, for anyone who understands this line and can tell the rest of us what should the set point be. So that's also immediately a bit of homework that you can take to your own factory. Go through standard operating procedures, and every time that you see that an operator is allowed to set some parameter between X and Y, that is something you would like to improve to become just one value. Again, when you see that an incoming material has to be between this and that, that's okay. But set points, so choices that we make, only one. And then you check for that. So when you do rounds as a team lead, as a production manager on the shop floor, and you're going to check if your processes are performing up to standards, check this input part. Of course, we're interested if the outcoming results are good. But for our operational focus, this is really the first part to be checking. And when we have operators setting our machines and in the correct way, having the material all according to the entrance specs, and a bad product comes out, we also know that we should not be blaming that operator's way of working. There is something going on that is outside of our standards. And when we check this list, and it's all okay, but we get a bad product, you can be pretty sure that you need to call in some maintenance engineers, some product technologists, some people with good root cause analysis skills, but also good knowledge of this whole process. Do not try to solve such issues with only a few operators discussing about how to set the line. You have a different problem here. On the other hand, if you do have a number of deviations from your standards, it's very easy. You do not need to call in all kinds of experts. Just make sure that your organization, again, goes back to standard operating procedures. Make sure that you get all the spread out of your inputs, and you will get a nice, stable final product coming out of these processes. And also, very important, based on your output, do not start changing all kinds of inputs. You have a best practice. If this process is not capable, if it sometimes produces too big, then too small, or too white or too yellow, but it is the best setting you can get, don't change the process. In this case, you have to accept some losses. But if this is stable, don't touch it, your operation is performing at its peak. Now, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, please drop me a comment. In a daily meeting, what percentage of KPIs or things that are discussed should roughly be on inputs and what percentage should be on outputs? I'd be dying to know how that differs from industry to industry, but also, of course, just with you, what is your opinion? How much time should we be spending on input versus output in a daily meeting? For now, I wish you the best of luck stabilizing your processes, and as always, enjoy the improvement journey.